Hello. All right. I'm Dr. Samantha Boldt here at Live Your Life Integrated Health and Chiropractic. And today we're going to talk about digestion and a few different things, usually some pretty quick changes sometimes that people can make to start feeling better. So give me 1 second here because I'm going to try to make sure I share my screen correctly with you guys. All right. I think everyone can see that. That looks good. Perfect. All right. So again, yep, we're going to talk about digestion here today. I'm Dr. Samantha Boldt, and this is for educational use only. This information is not intended to replace your primary care physician. All right, so one of the first things that I want to talk about, because so many people do have an issue with this, and a lot more is that a lot of people don't recognize that they might have an issue with some of this, is heartburn symptoms and heartburn in general and what that is and what that means. And even though a lot of times we call this heartburn, what it really is a dysfunction of the stomach acid in the stomach. Oftentimes not enough stomach acid. And so we're going to talk about some of the physiology and mechanics that go into heartburn because it is one of the first things that we have to do along that whole digestive tract. If the stomach is not working the way it's supposed to, if the acid is not there, it's going to be really challenging in order to have that rest of that digestive tract stay as healthy as it should. So heartburn is extremely common. It affects about 50% of Americans and 20% have heartburn on a weekly basis. And again, these are the numbers of people that know they have those symptoms. There's a lot of silent heartburn around as well. And heartburn medications are among the most common over-the-counter medications sold. And once people start taking them, a lot of people find that they kind of tend to have to start taking them more and more and may eventually end up just on them forever. Omeprazole, right, is a huge one as well in order to basically take care of these heartburn symptoms. But once you're on it, you can't get off. It doesn't seem like this problem is ever fixed. And why is that? And that's again because we really aren't treating the main problem. The problem isn't too much heartburn or too much stomach acid. The problem tends to be too little acid. All right, so how does this actually work? We have our esophagus, and then we have something called the lower esophageal sphincter between the esophagus and the stomach. And that sphincter is supposed to stay tightly closed unless we are swallowing. It's supposed to stay tightly closed to not allow any of those stomach contents to get back to the esophagus. When the stomach is supposed to be extremely acidic, a pH of 1 or 2, right? We're supposed to have a ton of acid in there, especially when we're eating, because that's its whole job, is to digest these kind of very heavy, thick things, right? It's supposed to be able to be breaking them down. So we need a lot of acid. And when that pH starts to rise, it starts becoming more basic, pH of 3, a 4, a 5, right? Well, it's not going to be doing the same amount of work that it should be doing. Now, when we have a very low pH of 1 or 2, super acidic stomach, it's going to send a lot of signals that lower esophageal sphincter. It sends a ton of chemicals, signals there to stay closed, stay closed, stay closed. Well, what happens when we start having either, not eating as well as we should, not drinking as well as we should, infection, stress, whatever that might be, right? That starts tend to change the pH of our stomach. It starts becoming that more basic. That pH starts rising to 3, 4, 5. We no longer send very strong signals to that sphincter to stay closed, and it starts opening up. Now that esophagus wants a pH of about 7, right? Neutral. It doesn't want anything acidic touching it for the most part, especially over long periods of time. So even if the stomach isn't super acidic or neutral, if it's somewhere in between, it's still going to hurt that esophagus. So looking at this graph here, basically what this is showing is that 11 to 20-year-olds had tons of stomach acid, all right? We do great at secreting stomach acid when we're young. When we tend to lose those cells that secrete stomach acid, they tend to stay gone for good. They don't come back, which is why oftentimes we end up with a lot of stomach acid when we're young, and then we lower that stomach acid throughout life, and we tend to have more and more digestive issues the lower that stomach acid gets. Now, if, too much stomach acid was really the problem, we'd have all these little kids going around on antacid pills, but we don't, or very rarely we do. And what we tend to see is more once we kind of get into our 20s, our 30s, 40s, and beyond. That's really where we have the most issues with this. So again, this lower esophageal sphincter kind of tells us the bigger picture of what's happening. And here at the top picture, we can see that it's closed. And the lower picture, we can see that that is open. And we want that again to be closed most of the time. In order to remain closed, the lower esophageal sphincter requires a pH of 1 to 3, preferably kind of 1 to 2. So if we reduce the pH of our stomach, that pH goes up, the receptors do not continue to tell that esophageal sphincter to stay closed. More and more stuff hits that esophageal sphincter. So what are some of the symptoms of too little acid? So I'm going to talk about, so far we've kind of talked a little bit more about heartburn and patients that, or people that realize that they have those symptoms. However, stomach acid isn't good just to keep that esophagus closed. It's actually doing some other stuff there. One of the biggest things is digesting proteins. We want to digest those proteins, turn them into amino acids, so that those amino acids can now become the building block for all these different pieces of our bodies. One of the biggest ones is those neurotransmitters. So serotonin, our dopamine, we create melatonin. These different neurotransmitters use those amino acids, but so do so many other things in our body. If we don't have enough stomach acid, we're going to start becoming deficient in those amino acids, basically in the building blocks that create our body. One of the other really big things that stomach acid does is help us absorb most of our minerals and some of our vitamins across the blood barrier. So if we don't have enough stomach acid, we are not going to be able to absorb most of our minerals and some of our vitamins. That's huge. Patients become nutrient deficient very quickly when they go on consistent antacids. And that's just because that stomach acid was there for a reason. It was doing a job. It was helping get nutrients across that barrier into our body where they belong. If we start going deficient in those nutrients, this is where a lot of these other problems are coming from. So stomach bloating, nausea when taking supplements, burping, upset stomach, burning, flatulence, diarrhea. These are more of the digestive issues that people tend to have when they know that they don't have enough stomach acid or when they think they have too much stomach acid. But moving over to the other side, those weak cracked fingernails, dilated capillaries in the cheeks and the nose, acne, and then of course, iron deficiencies, mineral deficiencies, those are going to lead to lots of other issues. And then chronic infections and undigested food in the stool as well. That would probably be over in that other column there. But either way, these are often some of the symptoms that we start seeing, and these are the initial symptoms, especially on that right side. A lot of those right side ones, those mineral deficiencies, that iron deficiencies, can start causing more and more symptoms down the road. So remember, acid is needed to digest proteins. It is essential for the absorption of minerals as well as some vitamins, and it is very protective against certain pathogens such as E. coli and H. pylori. H. pylori is a known cause of stomach ulcers. So if we can protect against those infections as well, you're less likely to have the stomach flu, some other major stomach stuff coming through, dysbiosis of the gut, leading again to other problems down the road. So how do you fix low stomach acid? And actually, let me rewind because I didn't include that in this talk today. How do you know you have low stomach acid? There are a few different markers that we'll look on blood panels that give us a decent idea whether or not stomach acid is an issue. Some of my top ones are that total protein level. If that total protein level falls below 6.9, I'm immediately starting to think about low stomach acid. Globulin. If globulin falls below 2.4, I'm immediately starting to think about low stomach acid. I will often also look at calcium, magnesium, phosphorus. Those are the ones that are more commonly on blood panels. If they are towards the lower side of functional normal or below functional ranges, then again, I will be looking at that low stomach acid. If all of them are low, then we are absolutely saying, okay, you may not have the symptoms that people typically relate to heartburn and that kind of stuff, but that doesn't mean that stomach acid isn't something that we should be working on. So once you know you have low stomach acid, what should we do about it? These are some of my favorite things. Number one, aloe juice, not aloe gel, not aloe water. You'll be really angry at me if you start chugging aloe gel. But aloe juice, typically we'll use half a shot 2 times a day. And that's exactly what we're saying there is, like a shot glass or something, take half of that twice a day. Same thing if you get a sunburn or something on your skin, right? You're going to put aloe on it to allow those cells to relax, to heal, to feel better. Well, same thing with that with the aloe juice is that along those esophageal cells, they kind of cover those cells there. It will allow them to heal more, allow that mucous membrane to kind of form a little bit more so that they're not as irritated or inflamed. Then we're going to ice the lower esophageal sphincter for 10 minutes. I always get my rights and lefts confused. but that is basically going to be, if you kind of find your sternum, at the very bottom of your sternum, you're going to go down maybe half an inch or so and over to your left about half an inch to an inch or so. And that's a decent idea of where it's a nice spot to put the ice. It's actually a little bit higher than that, but that's a nice place to put the ice, and that it kind of covers that whole area there. And so if you can ice that lower esophageal sphincter, even just for 5 minutes a day for like 2 or 3 weeks, it's going to calm down a lot of that inflammation, because that's one of the issues, is that all of that tissue damage has caused inflammation. And now that inflammation is blocking the ability of those chemo messengers basically to get to that sphincter. So even just by lowering inflammation, we can make those receptors work more easily. And then soft tissue work around that lower esophageal sphincter for 2 to 5 minutes daily. This is much harder to show over video, but same spot kind of is right around the sternum, and then going to the left side to that rib cage there. I will often go and find that very first rib head off of the sternum and just gently kind of press into it for about 10 to 20 seconds. I'll move down a quarter of a centimeter, very minimal. Same thing. I might be on the same rib head. I might be on a little bit lower rib head. You shouldn't move much. And then same thing is working on that and just kind of gently pressing into it for 10 or 20 seconds. And I usually move down to 4 to 5 different spots on that side. Should take 1 to 2 minutes, basically. I know it says 2 to 5 on here. Most patients can do that in easily within 2 minutes. And what that does is two different things. We are working on the soft tissue in that area to break up any scar tissue so that things work better. We don't want scar tissue to kind of build up to form. The more movement that most things in the abdominal area get, the better, the healthier they're going to be. And then the other thing is, actually by doing that movement, we're helping the nervous system basically regulate and say, hey, that's right, there is stuff here. I'm supposed to be signaling here. Let me create this stronger brain-gut connection. So when we're working on that area, even though it kind of seems a little odd at first, and most people have never done any massage work in that area, it's actually can be very helpful for getting digestion in general to improve. Number 4, take betaine HCl. Betaine HCl is stomach acid. We use 2 different kinds in the office. Spectrazyme Medigest is the Medigest version. We'll also use HCl support from Nutridyne. They're actually, I think, the exact same measurements, just different companies. And by doing that, we'll actually be adding acid to the stomach. We'll create these stronger signals. You should only ever take this with food. I also do not recommend doing this if you are not working with a practitioner. Somebody should be watching you. If it hurts, if it causes more heartburn issues, you got to go through steps 1 to 3 and repeat those for 1 to 2 months before trying to add in that stomach acid again. You should easily be able to do a stomach acid pill. If you can't, we've got to get that inflammation down. We've got to get that irritation down. We got to allow those cells to start healing before we add that acid in. Never push through heartburn symptoms. Don't add more acid thinking that's going to help, okay? But again, I do not recommend, I always recommend, I should say, being under the care of a practitioner when working with betaine HCl. And of course, make necessary diet changes. That's some other stuff that we'll talk about, but the more sugar we eat, the more breads and carbs that we eat, I mean, all this stuff just makes it harder for our digestive tract to do what it's supposed to do. Oh yeah, and then my other big one, chew. So that actually does help the stomach as well, because it basically signals to the stomach to start producing more of this stomach acid. And most of us do not chew enough. I have some patients that are just shoving whole sandwiches in their mouth, being done in 2 or 3 minutes. We want to take our time. It is more than just that act of mastication, breaking up the food. Not that that's not helpful, so that the rest of our gut has less work to do. But we actually produce amylase, some other enzymes in the mouth that will start help breaking down some of the food that we're eating. And we get more of this whole hormonal signaling pathway cascade down the rest of our digestive tract to say, hey, start preparing. Here we come. And it can take a few minutes to do that. So if we're shoving our food down within 3 to 5 minutes, how much time do you think the rest of our digestive tract had to prepare for that food to come? Very minimal. Usually chewing, we're kind of saying about 30 bites per piece, which is kind of a lot for certain patients or overwhelming for certain patients. Oftentimes I'll say at least the first 2 minutes of every meal, make sure you're doing that 30 times chewing each piece. That way we're at least getting some of that connection, some of that signaling starting to go. If it's too hard to focus on that for the whole meal, start with just that first 2 minutes. All right, we're going to switch over now into let's talk sugar. This is one that everybody knows is an issue, but I often get a ton of patients that have no idea how much sugar they're actually eating throughout the day. So I kind of put this together to start showing that there is a lot more to sugar than just our glucose and hemoglobin A1C markers, and that a lot of people are eating way more sugar than they realize. All right, about 30 million American adults have diabetes, and over 90 million American adults have prediabetes. So about 10% of American adults have diabetes, 36% have prediabetes. And this data was from 5 years ago. It's only gotten worse. And basically, we're about half of the population has diabetes. The hard part, or at least prediabetes, the hard part is that 90 million Americans don't know that they are 90% of those 90 million Americans don't know that they are pre-diabetic. And that's huge because that's tons of people walking around not realizing that they are having blood sugar dysregulation issues. Why are we talking about blood sugar dysregulation issues when it comes to the digestive tract? That is typically because of basically brain signaling and those hormones that play a part in that brain signaling to the gut, as well as the microbiome of the digestive tract. When we are adding more sugar into our gut than we are supposed to be, we're throwing off insulin, we're throwing off other hormones that are supposed to be regulating ghrelin, motilin, all these different other hormones that regulate how we eat, how full we feel, how we digest, what the pancreas is supposed to release, what the gallbladder is supposed to release. And sugar can play a huge part. The other thing is sugar is very inflammatory, so it will actually block a lot of these signals from happening. So moving on here, what is type 2 diabetes actually? Diabetes is having that HbA1c of 6.5, greater than 6.5. Prediabetes is having that HbA1c 5.7 to 6.5. And we're really focusing on that insulin. Insulin is the hormone that puts blood sugar away. Now, a lot of patients don't get tested for insulin because insurance doesn't cover it, and it makes no sense. Hemoglobin A1C is an estimation. It is an equation, okay? So what it tells us is basically how much blood sugar have our red blood cells been exposed to before we die. But we are missing a huge piece of information from that equation. We don't know how long your red blood cells are living. Really healthy red blood cells can live up to 4 years. Unhealthy red blood cells might only live 2 years. And so if we don't know that piece of the equation, we don't really know what this HbA1c means. When people have really healthy red blood cells, and sorry, I said years, I meant months. When their red blood cells are living up to 4 full months, right, they're going to be exposed to some more blood sugar over that time. So I have patients with an HbA1c of 5.8, 5.9, but they're doing really good. They have these really long living red blood cells. Their insulin is low. Their glucose, their fasting glucose is at a nice level. We're really not that concerned. Even though they look pre-diabetic, they're doing great. Some people that are fairly unhealthy with their red blood cells, they only live 2 months. So, if they're only we're only seeing the blood sugar exposed to those red blood cells for a 2-month period, they might have an HbA1c of 5, and the doctors are telling them they're great, but their insulin's up there at like 25 or 30 because don't have healthy red blood cells. So HbA1c is not a great marker. We should not be measuring blood sugar dysregulation based on it, unless we can really start testing how long everyone's red blood cells are living, which we don't have that ability to easily do at the moment. So insulin is really where I like to see the levels of what blood sugar is. I like to see most of my patients' insulin levels between 2 and 7. Western blood references go all the way up to 25, which is absolutely crazy. They should never go up that high. Basically, anybody over 10, I just immediately start going, nope, blood sugar dysregulation. We need to really start working on this. All right. And then that's the other thing. 20% of normal weight and non-pre-diabetic adults are insulin resistant. So even though they might not technically be pre-diabetic, you can be skinny and have major insulin problems. And this is why we always look at that marker, because you can't just look by ours. You can't just tell by looking at somebody. We need to actually test and know what insulin levels are. What raises insulin levels? Carbohydrates, and to a lesser extent, sorry, that 2 is spelled wrong, excess protein. So carbohydrates are just a challenge to our system. We just eat them in so much excess nowadays. It is causing so much problems to our digestive health, not just sugar levels, but digestion in general. Our gut was not meant to absorb carbohydrates in the amount that we currently eat them. Protein, I just added in here as a reminder that protein turns into carbohydrates, turns into glucose in the system. I have some patients that kind of went on these full protein diets, and for some reason, their hemoglobin, they're like, my hemoglobin A1C is going up, my glucose is going up, my insulin is going up. Why is this? Well, they're definitely reacting. That protein is turning into that glucose again, and that's where it's raising that blood sugar. When we end up lowering that and adding in more vegetables, we get very quick drops in that blood sugar again. And this is just a nice picture to show kind of a little bit more what we should be eating when we want stable blood sugar throughout the day. And again, stable blood sugar means that all these different hormones and enzymes that signal what our gut and digestive tract are supposed to be doing are going to be able to work much more easily. Okay. So carbohydrates cause this very quick rise in blood glucose. Protein is more of a moderate rise, and that nice healthy fat is this nice long term, energy stabilizing energy level. So we will talk about that again in just a second here. But this is one of the reasons that we kind of go a little bit more towards fat or protein in order to stabilize blood sugar. Because most carbohydrates are going to send blood sugar up very quickly, comes back down. And now we have to end up being on this blood sugar roller coaster throughout the day. And that's just no fun. People do not feel good. It's very energy intensive when we're doing that. It's much easier to have stable blood sugar. And we don't even need carbohydrates to be healthy. There are essential fats, essential amino acids with protein, but no essential carbohydrates. They even did some studies. I don't think they've done any on humans, but on mice and chicken, they've definitely done some studies, is taking out all carbohydrates from the diet for months to see how they did. And they were absolutely fine. They're actually very healthy chickens and mice. So we do not need carbohydrates to live. We can make carbohydrates, we can make glucose on our own through these other materials. And there was a meta-analysis done. This was back done in 2016, 53 studies that basically, this was the title of the study of their paper. Meta-analysis of 53 studies shows conclusively that low carb beats low fat. I did not include all those different graphs today for this talk, but there are multiple studies that basically show when we go more towards that high fat diet, more keto based, right? But in a healthy way, when we're going towards these healthy high fats, we see so many good things happen to the lab work. The lipid panels go down, the triglycerides, total cholesterol. We see blood sugar end up going down. We see inflammatory markers going down. All these good things happen to the lab work when we go more towards these higher fat diets, lower carb diets. But again, there are certain ways that we should be doing some of these. So how much sugar should we be eating? Well, the answer is probably pretty much zero for the most part. If you have ever looked at a nutrition label, you might have noticed that there is no daily percentage next to the sugar, and that's because it is not a recommended food. Multiple studies have found that sugar in any amount has detrimental effects on the body. So we really do want to be careful about how much sugar we are consuming, how much sugar we are eating. Sugar causes inflammation. Problems with nutrient absorption, causes electrolyte imbalances, disrupts hormone receptors in the body, decreases the effectiveness of our immune system. So sugar is just kind of a really big challenge to our body. And our bodies have a low threshold for sugar, 2 teaspoons, 2 to 3 times a day. How many grams is this? So 8 grams, 2 to 3 times per day, give or take, is what we should be eating. About 16 to 24 grams of sugar. Now, the American Heart Association says you should not have any more than 41 grams of sugar a day if you want to avoid cardiovascular problems. But that was cardiovascular health. All this other health, especially nervous system health, preventing things like Parkinson's, dementia, Alzheimer's, we really want to be closer to that less than 25 grams of sugar a day. One of my big rules is if anything says more than 8 grams on a serving, don't eat it, don't buy it, don't bring it into your home, leave it where it is. It should not have more than 8 grams of sugar. Even that's on the higher side, okay? And therefore we should be consuming less than 40 grams of sugar a day in order to keep your heart healthy, and less than 24 grams of sugar a day in order to keep everything else healthy. How much sugar does the average American eat each day? And again, these statistics are about 5 to 8 years old, give or take. 187 grams of sugar every day. And many people, again, don't realize it. Sorry, this picture is blurry at the moment, but this is showing the history of sugar consumption in America, that we're just going, starting from the 1700s to 2010, we have just gone up and up and up exponentially since we kind of discovered that there. So let's look at a traditional American breakfast because this is where we get to see where some of this sugar comes from. Remember, 24 grams a day was kind of the limit. So at breakfast, if we're having half a cup of milk, that's 6 grams. If we're having a cup of cereal, that's already 14 grams for a lot of the typical cereals. 8 ounces, a small thing of orange juice is 22 grams. A piece of toast is 5 grams. And if you put a tablespoon of jelly on that toast, it's 14 grams. So you're already at 61 grams of sugar and you haven't even left breakfast yet. It is very easy in today's day and what we eat to very quickly go above those sugar levels. We've got to be so cautious with what we are eating in order to keep those sugar levels lower and more importantly, digestive health and gut regulation more even keel. So I put breakfast at the bottom here again, just to remind myself. I did want to talk about what I do with most patients for breakfast. For most patients coming into my office, we are going to say that breakfast should basically be 2 to 3 servings of vegetables and 1 to 2 servings of healthy fats or protein, or mixtures of both is usually what we're looking for. When we have that in the morning, what we're doing is these really long chain fibers from the vegetables and these healthy fats and proteins, if you remember that picture, create this nice balance of blood sugar throughout the day so that we're not having these major roller coaster dips. And if we can do that for breakfast, even if we don't change anything else about what you eat the rest of the day, that's where patients tend to get their biggest difference from is with that breakfast. We are waking up from a fast. If we immediately put in a tons of sugar, we just start that roller coaster off. If we wake up and we have this nice moderate level, even if we eat something more sugary, carby, or later in the day, we get a blip, but we usually don't get that same roller coaster ride. I get a lot of issues initially with patients eating vegetables for breakfast. We very quickly get over that in this office. I just say, think of it as any other meal. Some favorites are more carrots and jicama. They tend to be cold and crunchy, so patients tend to like that more in the morning. I eat broccoli every morning. So if you want to cook something, if you want to add it to eggs, whatever that might be, I usually say get those 2 to 3 servings of vegetables in the morning to really help sustain the rest of the day. And also with that 1 to 2 servings of fat protein, something like eggs, a healthy meat choice, avocados. Edamame is actually a really decent source of fats, nuts, nut butter, seeds. So any of those healthier fats and protein mixtures are a great breakfast start. So in conclusion, eat less sugar. You are sweet enough already. All right, you guys. Well, I hope that that was helpful today. The big things that we talked about were heartburn and starting to create healthier changes to that signaling of that stomach acid. If we don't have enough stomach acid, we may not have heartburn symptoms, but it's going to affect the rest of our digestive tract. Most patients that come in here with any digestive issues whatsoever have some sort of low stomach acid issue. And then finally, sugar, changing up that diet, adding in more vegetables, especially, or those healthy fats. What we end up doing is taking out these carbs that our body does not need, that usually have very little nutrition in them. And we are adding in much more nutrient dense foods that allow that blood sugar to stay stable throughout the day, which then allows all these digestive hormones and enzymes to work more appropriately as well. All right, that was a lot. I know I talk really fast, but hopefully we will see you guys next month when we share our next Zoom video here. Thanks, guys.